The price of deception. The courtroom buzzed with tension as the trial of State versus Reynolds began. The prosecution seemed unusually confident, their key witness being Officer Mark Rollins, a decorated member of the city's police force. His testimony was crucial to convicting the defendant, Rachel Reynolds, a seemingly ordinary woman accused of resisting arrest and assaulting a police officer. But Rachel was far from ordinary. Beneath her calm demeanor and modest clothing lay a carefully concealed identity: Special Agent Rachel Reynolds of the FBI's Internal Affairs Division, a veteran investigator with years of experience taking down corrupt officials. However, she had been operating undercover on a high-profile investigation for months when everything went sideways. What should have been a routine assignment had turned into a full-scale frame-up. She knew exactly what was happening. The moment she was arrested and charged, it became clear someone inside the police department was trying to bury her, desperate to stop her from uncovering the web of corruption she had been piecing together for months. Now, sitting at the defendant's table, Rachel watched Officer Rollins take the stand. He stood tall and confident, his police uniform pressed and pristine, his face the very image of righteous authority. His words carried a ring of practiced sincerity. "I observed the defendant behaving erratically," Rollins testified. "She became aggressive when I approached her, and when I tried to restrain her, she struck me and attempted to flee." He paused, glancing at the jury with a somber expression. "I was just trying to protect the public." The prosecutor nodded approvingly, turning toward the jury. "Thank you, Officer Rollins. No further questions." Rachel's defense attorney, a sharp but quiet man named Sam Everett, stood and adjusted his tie. He approached the witness stand with measured steps, his eyes locked on Rollins. "Officer Rollins," Sam began, "you mentioned that my client assaulted you without provocation. Could you clarify exactly how she did that?" Rollins smirked slightly. "She shoved me hard in the chest, then tried to punch me in the face." Sam nodded slowly. "Interesting. And you have medical documentation of any injuries sustained during this incident?" Rollins hesitated for a fraction of a second, a hesitation Rachel didn't miss. "Nothing serious enough to require treatment," he said. Sam raised an eyebrow. "So, no bruises, no cuts, no fractures?" "No," Rollins admitted. Sam paused for effect, then crossed his arms. "Officer Rollins, are you familiar with the defendant's background?" Rollins shrugged. "Not particularly." Sam smiled faintly. "Let me help you, then." He turned to the judge. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to introduce new evidence related to Ms. Reynolds' identity and professional background." The judge leaned forward. "Proceed." Sam walked back to the defense table and picked up a slim folder, handing it to the judge and jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, my client, Rachel Reynolds, is a high-ranking special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. She has been with the FBI for nearly 2 decades and is currently assigned to the Internal Affairs Division, specializing in corruption cases involving law enforcement." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Rollins' confident expression faltered, his eyes widening. Sam turned back to Rollins, his voice calm but relentless. "Officer Rollins, did you really not know who she was when you arrested her?" I had no idea," Rollins stammered, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. Sam nodded slowly. "Let me make this easier for you. You knew exactly who she was. In fact, you and several others in your department have been under investigation by Agent Reynolds for corruption, bribery, and falsifying evidence. Isn't that right?" The color drained from Rollins' face. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. "I remind you that you're under oath," Sam added. Rollins shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I might have heard something about an investigation, but I wasn't involved in any of that. Sam didn't let up. Really? Because we have surveillance footage of you meeting with two known associates of Detective Harris, the primary subject of Agent Reynolds' investigation. We also have phone records showing multiple calls between you and Harris in the days leading up to her arrest. The courtroom erupted in whispers. The judge banged his gavel. Order! Order in the court! Sam stepped closer to the witness stand, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. Officer Rollins, you orchestrated the false arrest of Agent Reynolds to discredit her and stop her investigation. Isn't that true? I didn't, Rollins stuttered. You lied under oath today, Officer Rollins, Sam cut him off. And you lied on your police report. But your lies are over now. Rachel sat quietly, her eyes locked on Rollins, her face unreadable. She had endured countless hours of interrogation, false accusations, and public humiliation. But now, the truth was finally coming to light. The judge leaned back in his chair, his expression grave. Officer Rollins, based on the evidence presented, I'm ordering an immediate investigation into your actions. Bailiff, take him into custody. As Rollins was escorted out of the courtroom, his face a mixture of rage and fear, Sam turned to Rachel and gave her a small nod. The prosecutor, visibly shaken, stood and addressed the judge. Your Honor, in light of this new information, the prosecution moves to dismiss all charges against the defendant. The judge nodded. Motion granted. Case dismissed. Rachel stood, her shoulders straight, her eyes fierce. She had survived the storm, and justice had prevailed. But as she walked out of the courtroom, she knew this was only the beginning. The investigation was far from over. More corrupt officers were still out there, and she wouldn't stop until they were all brought to justice. As she stepped into the sunlight, she took a deep breath, already planning her next move. No one lies about Rachel Reynolds and gets away with it. Chapter 2: Shadows Within the System. Rachel strode out of the courthouse, her heels clicking sharply on the pavement. Her mind was already racing. Officer Rollins had cracked under pressure, but he was only a small piece of a much larger puzzle. His panicked expression during cross-examination confirmed what she already suspected: he wasn't acting alone. She reached for her phone and dialed a number. The line connected almost immediately. Agent Daniels, a calm voice answered on the other end. Daniels, it's Reynolds. Rollins slipped in court. We've got him in custody, but there's more. I need you to pull surveillance on every officer connected to Detective Harris. Focus on anyone who's been in contact with Rollins in the last 6 months. Understood, Daniels replied. Are you safe? Rachel paused, glancing around the busy street. She knew better than to assume she was in the clear. For now. But I'm sure they'll try something again. Keep me updated. She ended the call and slipped the phone into her pocket, her eyes scanning the crowd. Years of experience had taught her to trust her instincts, and right now, they were screaming at her to stay alert. As she reached her car, a black SUV parked across the street caught her attention. The windows were tinted too dark to see inside, but the engine was running. Rachel's pulse quickened. Amateurs, she thought, forcing herself to act casual. She unlocked her car and climbed inside, her movements calm and deliberate. She glanced at the rearview mirror, watching for signs of pursuit. Sure enough, the black SUV pulled out and began following her. Rachel smirked. All right, let's see how far you're willing to go. The chase begins. Rachel turned onto a quiet side street, her eyes never leaving the mirror. The SUV followed, keeping a careful distance. She knew these streets well, knew every shortcut and dead end. She pressed her foot on the accelerator, picking up speed. The SUV followed suit. Amateurs, she thought again. With a sharp turn, she cut down an alleyway, tires screeching on the pavement. She emerged on the other side, weaving through traffic as the SUV struggled to keep up. Suddenly, she slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop in front of an abandoned warehouse. The SUV screeched to a halt behind her. Rachel stepped out of her car, her eyes locked on the vehicle. "Let's settle this," she muttered. The SUV's doors swung open, and two men in dark suits stepped out. Their faces were hard, their eyes cold. One of them reached into his jacket, revealing a gun. "Agent Reynolds," the man said, his voice low and threatening. "You've been digging where you shouldn't. It's time for you to walk away. Permanently." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "You must be new at this. Threatening a federal agent in broad daylight? Not the brightest move." The man smirked. "No one's around to hear you scream." Rachel chuckled. "Oh, trust me. You won't be hearing me scream." Before the man could react, Rachel moved. Years of hand-to-hand combat training kicked in as she closed the distance between them in a heartbeat. Her fist connected with his jaw, sending him stumbling backward. The second man raised his gun, but Rachel was faster. She twisted his arm, forcing the weapon to the ground, and delivered a swift kick to his ribs. Within seconds, both men were on the ground, groaning in pain. Rachel knelt down, grabbing the collar of the first man. "Who sent you?" The man glared at her, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "You're too late. It's bigger than you think. Harris is just the beginning." Rachel tightened her grip. "I can make this a lot worse for you. Start talking." But the man only laughed. "You'll never stop it. They'll bury you before you get close." Rachel let go, standing up and wiping her hands. She knew a dead end when she saw one. "Have it your way," she said. "But when I find out who sent you, I'll make sure they regret it." She grabbed the man's gun and tossed it into a nearby dumpster before walking back to her car. As she drove away, her mind raced. "Harris is just the beginning," he had said. Rachel knew she was onto something far bigger than she had realized. This wasn't just a few corrupt cops protecting each other. This was something deeper, something powerful. And if she wanted to survive, she would need to move fast. Her phone buzzed. It was Daniels. "We've got something," he said. "You're not going to believe this. Harris isn't just connected to Rollins, he's got ties to a high-ranking city official. We're talking millions of dollars in bribes and contracts being funneled through shell companies. It's a full-scale operation." Rachel's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Send me everything you've got. We're blowing this wide open." Daniels hesitated. "Rachel, be careful. If they've gone this far to stop you, they won't hesitate to try again." "I'm counting on it," Rachel said. "But this time, I'll be ready for them." As she hung up, a cold determination settled in her chest. The game had changed. The shadows were closing in, but Rachel Reynolds wasn't afraid of the dark. She thrived in it. Chapter 3: Into the Lion's Den. Rachel sat in her car outside a nondescript office building on the outskirts of downtown. To most people, it looked like just another gray block of corporate nothingness. But according to the intel Daniels had sent her, it was a front, a shell company at the heart of the corruption ring she was chasing. The building was registered to Crestline Solutions, a company that didn't actually do anything. No public clients, no legitimate business dealings. Yet it had millions flowing through its accounts. And now, it was her next target. Rachel checked her phone. Daniels had provided her with the blueprints of the building. Small office, one main entrance, a private elevator leading to a secure floor upstairs. No armed guards listed, but Rachel knew better than to trust appearances. She slipped a slim earpiece into her ear and adjusted her jacket. Daniels, you copy? Loud and clear, his voice crackled. You sure you want to do this alone? I work better that way, she replied, stepping out of the car. Stay on the line. If anything happens, I want backup ready to move in. Understood. Be careful. Rachel crossed the street, her eyes scanning every detail, the security cameras, the locks on the doors, the tinted windows on the top floor. Every step brought her closer to the truth, and closer to danger. She entered the building, the cool air and hum of fluorescent lights giving it a sterile, lifeless feel. A receptionist sat at the front desk, barely glancing up from her computer. Can I help you? The woman asked, her voice bored. Rachel smiled politely. I have a meeting with Mr. Keller. Top floor. The receptionist frowned. I don't see. Rachel leaned in, lowering her voice. Tell him it's about the Crestline accounts. He'll want to see me. The woman hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting to a phone on the desk. After a few tense seconds, she picked it up and pressed a button. Sir, there's someone here to see you. She says it's about the Crestline accounts. There was a pause. Then a muffled voice replied, send her up. The receptionist hung up, clearly uncomfortable. Top floor. Take the elevator at the end of the hall. Thanks, Rachel said, walking toward the elevator. Face to face. The elevator ride felt endless. Rachel's pulse quickened as she mentally reviewed her plan. She had no idea who this Mr. Keller was, but if he was running this operation, he would have answers, or at least give her something to work with. The doors slid open with a soft chime. The top floor was nothing like the rest of the building. It was sleek and modern, with glass walls and expensive furniture. A large office at the end of the hallway caught her attention. The door was slightly ajar. Rachel stepped inside. A man in his late 50s stood behind a massive oak desk. His gray suit was impeccably tailored, his eyes sharp and calculating. Agent Reynolds, he said with a smirk. I was wondering when you'd show up. Rachel froze for half a second. He knows who I am. Keller gestured to a chair in front of his desk. Please, have a seat. Rachel remained standing. I'll pass. I'm not really in the mood for small talk. Keller chuckled, his eyes never leaving hers. Fair enough. You've been busy, haven't you? Digging into things that don't concern you. Corruption concerns me, Rachel shot back. Bribes, falsified evidence, shell companies. You've built quite the little empire here. But it's over. I've got enough evidence to take you and your entire network down. Keller sighed, shaking his head. Agent Reynolds, you're smart. I'll give you that. But you're also predictable. Before Rachel could react, two men appeared in the doorway behind her, blocking her exit. Both were armed. Keller smiled coldly. You walked right into the lion's den, just like I knew you would. And now, you're going to disappear, just another tragic casualty in a dangerous world. Rachel's heart pounded, but her face remained calm. You think this is the first time someone's tried to get rid of me? I've taken down men far more dangerous than you. The difference between them and you? Keller raised an eyebrow. Oh. What's that? Rachel's eyes hardened. They didn't underestimate me. The fight. In a flash, Rachel moved. She grabbed the nearest chair and swung it into the first man, knocking him off balance. The second man raised his gun, but she kicked his arm, sending the weapon clattering across the floor. Keller backed away, shouting for help as Rachel took down the first man with a well-placed punch. The second man lunged at her, but she sidestepped, using his momentum to throw him into a glass wall. The glass cracked but didn't shatter, and he crumpled to the ground, groaning. Rachel grabbed his gun and turned toward Keller, her eyes blazing. "Call them off," she ordered. Keller hesitated, then reached for his phone. His fingers trembled as he pressed a button. "All units, stand down," he said into the phone. Rachel kept the gun trained on him. "Now, you're going to tell me everything. Every name, every connection, every account. Or I'll drag you out of here myself and make sure you spend the rest of your life in a federal prison." Keller stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. You win." He sat down at his desk and opened a laptop. "But you should know, once you open this door, there's no going back. You're stepping into a world far darker than you can imagine." Rachel leaned closer, her voice a low whisper. "Good. I've always liked the dark." Chapter 4: Uncovering the Web. Keller's fingers danced across the keyboard, his face pale but focused. The tension in the room was electric as the laptop screen flickered to life. Rows of encrypted files, bank transfers, and internal memos filled the screen, evidence of a sprawling network of corruption that stretched far beyond the local police department. Rachel leaned in, her sharp eyes absorbing every detail. Crestline Solutions wasn't just a front for laundering bribe money. It was a central hub in a far-reaching conspiracy involving high-ranking officials, private contractors, and law enforcement officers across multiple cities. "You've got less than 5 minutes to tell me what I need to know," Rachel said, her tone cold and unwavering. Keller's mouth tightened. "This operation was never mine. I'm just a middleman. You think taking me down will stop it? The people who really run things, they're untouchable. They've been at this for years." Rachel's jaw clenched. "Names. I want names." Keller hesitated, his eyes darting to the armed men still unconscious on the floor. "You don't understand what you're asking. These people won't just come after you, they'll come after anyone you've ever cared about. Friends, family. They'll erase you like you never existed." Rachel's face darkened. "You should have done your homework, Keller. I don't have anyone they can use against me. I made sure of that a long time ago." Keller stared at her, realizing too late that he had miscalculated. He sighed heavily and opened a folder labeled Priority Contacts. A list of names and phone numbers appeared on the screen, along with dossiers on several prominent figures. Rachel recognized some of the names immediately: Detective Harris, Councilman David Pierce, and Chief of Police Andrew Wolf. But others were more surprising: corporate executives, city planners, even judges. She quickly snapped photos of the screen with her phone, her heart racing. "This is it. This is the proof I've been looking for." But just as she finished, an alarm blared through the building. Red lights flashed in the hallway. Keller leaned back in his chair, a smug smile returning to his face. "Looks like your time's up. My people are on their way." Rachel didn't hesitate. She grabbed Keller's laptop and yanked the hard drive out in one swift motion. "Thanks for the files," she said. "You won't make it out of here," Keller called after her as she turned to leave. Even if you do, they'll hunt you down. This isn't over, Agent Reynolds. Rachel glanced over her shoulder. No, it's just getting started. Escape from Crestline. Rachel sprinted down the hallway, the alarm echoing in her ears. She could hear footsteps pounding on the floors above her. Keller's backup was closing in fast. Daniels, she barked into her earpiece. I need an exit route. Now. Got you, Daniels replied, his voice urgent. Head to the east stairwell. There's a maintenance door that leads to the alley. I've got a car waiting 2 blocks down. Rachel pushed open the stairwell door and raced down the steps, taking them 2 at a time. The sound of shouting grew louder, and she knew they were right behind her. Bursting through the maintenance door, she found herself in a narrow alleyway. The air was thick with the smell of oil and garbage, but freedom was close. A black sedan waited at the end of the alley, its engine running. Daniels stood beside it, holding the door open. Hurry, he shouted. Rachel sprinted toward the car, her breath coming in short, controlled gasps. She dove into the back seat just as a group of armed men burst into the alley behind her, guns drawn. Daniels jumped into the driver's seat and hit the gas, tires squealing as they sped away. Bullets pinged off the car's rear bumper, but they were already out of range. Rachel leaned back, her pulse finally slowing. She glanced at the hard drive in her hand, the weight of it almost tangible. We've got everything we need, she said. This is bigger than we thought, Daniels. Way bigger. Daniels nodded, his eyes on the road. Then we need to move fast. If these people find out what you've taken, they'll come at you with everything they've got. Rachel's lips curled into a grim smile. Let them come. I've been waiting for this fight. Chapter 5, The Hunters Become the Hunted. They drove in silence for several miles, weaving through side streets and switching cars twice to avoid being followed. By the time they reached the safe house, a modest apartment on the outskirts of the city, it was nearly midnight. Daniel set up a secure connection on his laptop while Rachel plugged in the hard drive. The screen lit up with hundreds of encrypted files. Bank statements, contracts, surveillance footage, and, most damning of all, secret communications between Councilman Pierce and Chief Wolf, detailing their involvement in everything from money laundering to orchestrated arrests. This is a goldmine, Daniels said, his eyes wide. We can take down the entire network with this. Rachel nodded, but her mind was already on the next step. We need to move carefully. We'll leak just enough to get the media's attention, but we hold back the most critical evidence until we have federal backup. If we release everything at once, they'll bury it, and us, before it can spread. Daniels hesitated. Rachel, once we go public, there's no going back. They'll throw everything they've got at us. Rachel's eyes burned with determination. Good. Let them. For too long, they've operated in the shadows, thinking they were untouchable. But now we've got the light, and we're going to shine it on every last one of them. Daniels grinned. Then let's burn it all down. Chapter 6, The Storm Breaks. The next morning, the world began to shift. Rachel and Daniels executed their plan with precision. A carefully crafted package of evidence was sent to multiple media outlets, exposing the first layer of the conspiracy, Councilman David Pierce and Chief of Police Andrew Wolf. Within hours, news anchors were breaking the story, broadcasting shocking details of corruption, bribes, and orchestrated arrests. The city's most powerful figures were caught in the spotlight, their secrets laid bare. Pierce and Wolf immediately denied the allegations, but it was too late. Rachel's evidence was irrefutable: bank statements, recorded conversations, and internal emails that painted a damning picture. The media frenzy was relentless. But Rachel wasn't celebrating yet. She knew they'd struck a nerve, and the real fight was about to begin. Chapter 7: The Trap. Late that night, Rachel sat in the safe house, her eyes fixed on the laptop screen. Daniels was in the kitchen, pouring coffee, when Rachel's phone buzzed. She picked it up and saw a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. I have information you'll want. Alone. Warehouse 17, Docks. Midnight." Daniels leaned over her shoulder, frowning. "It's a trap." "Of course it's a trap," Rachel said with a wry smile. "But we're going anyway." Daniels hesitated. "What's the play?" Rachel stood, slipping her gun into its holster. "We spring their trap, and close it on them." Chapter 8: Showdown at the Docks. The warehouse loomed in the darkness, its broken windows glowing faintly in the moonlight. Rachel moved silently through the shadows, her every sense on high alert. She had backup on standby, an elite FBI team hidden nearby, but for now, it was just her. A figure stepped out of the darkness, a tall man with silver hair and a calm, cold expression. "Chief Andrew Wolf." "I wondered if you'd actually come," Wolf said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "You've caused quite a mess, Agent Reynolds." Rachel tilted her head. "Funny, I was thinking the same thing about you." Wolf smirked. "You're good. I'll give you that. But you made one mistake, you underestimated how deep this goes. Arresting me won't stop it. Cut off one head, and two more will take its place." Rachel's grip tightened on her gun. "Good thing I'm aiming to take down the whole body." Wolf's smile faded. "You won't make it out of here alive." The sound of footsteps echoed from all sides as armed men stepped out of the shadows, surrounding Rachel. But Rachel didn't flinch. "You should have brought more," she said calmly. In an instant, the warehouse exploded into chaos. The fight for justice. Rachel moved like a force of nature, quick, precise, and deadly. The first man raised his gun, but she shot him in the leg before he could pull the trigger. She ducked behind a stack of crates as bullets tore through the air around her. Through her earpiece, Daniel's voice crackled to life. "Backup's moving in. 30 seconds. Rachel smirked. "Plenty of time." She rolled out from behind the crates, taking down two more men with perfect shots. Wolf tried to escape through a side door, but Rachel was faster. She tackled him to the ground, pinning him with a knee to his back. "You're done," she said, slapping handcuffs on him. Wolf struggled, his face twisted with fury. "You think this will change anything? You can't stop them all." Rachel leaned in close. "Watch me." The sound of sirens filled the air as FBI agents swarmed the warehouse, securing the scene. Daniels jogged over, his face lit with relief. "Nice work," he said. "We've got Wolf and half his men in custody. This is over." Rachel stood, catching her breath. "No, it's not over. This is just the beginning. But now, we have the upper hand." Daniels nodded, understanding. "So what's next?" Rachel looked out at the city lights in the distance, her eyes burning with determination. "Now, we dismantle every piece of this network," she said. "We bring them all down, every last one of them." Epilogue: A New Dawn. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Wolf, Pierce, and dozens of others were indicted on a staggering list of charges. The investigation expanded, exposing layers of corruption that reached even higher than Rachel had anticipated. Rachel became a hero in the eyes of the public, a relentless force for justice who refused to back down. But for her, it wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about doing what was right. About cleaning the rot from the system, no matter how deep it went. One morning, as she stood on the balcony of her apartment, watching the sun rise over the city, her phone buzzed. It was Daniels. "We've got a lead on the next target," he said. "You ready?" Rachel smiled. "Always." And with that, she turned and walked back inside, ready to face whatever came next. Because the fight for justice never truly ends.